Dean, thanks for coming. Thanks for coming aboard.
No, pleasure having me.
It's been a long time that we have been getting requests to have a Brit on here. So you're the first. Well, we had one photographer who had been to Iraq, but I think you're our first British military person, and there's been a lot of requests.
Oh, brilliant. Great.
So glad to have you here, man.
Yeah, no pressure.
Yeah, the whole nation is riding on your shoulders. So, that's the beginning of this book, and the beginning of the book starts off sort of the middle of your operational career when you talk about the military operations and then civilian operations. But I guess we should start at the beginning. I always like to start at the beginning of, where you came from and how you ended up in this particular situation in life. And let's get to it.
Yeah, so I was born into a military family. My father, he was in the Royal Engineers, and so I was very much immersed in that environment. And I grew up in a town called Aldershot, which was the home of the British Army. So it's just airborne heavy. You had 2 para there, you had 3 para there. I'd never even heard of the Royal Marines or the Special Boat Service. You know what I mean? It was just SAS and airborne. My father and my mother, they ended up splitting up when I was quite a young age. By the age of 8, my mother left my father and took me and my sisters to Manchester up north. And we ended up in a homeless home in Moss Side. And Moss Side back in the 80s was the roughest estate in the whole of the UK.
Now when Brits say estate,
yeah.
When Americans say estate, they're thinking of like a country estate with big houses. When Brits say estate, you're talking about the ghetto.
Yeah, it's a ghetto, yeah.
And it's a government housing, right? Isn't it a government housing estate? That's where the word estate comes from?
Yeah, they call them council estates. And yeah, but obviously to get your name on the housing market, you have to then go into a homeless home. So that's what we did. We ended up in a homeless shelter in Moss Side, and I was the only white, me and my sisters, the only Caucasians in the area, so we were attracting attention from an early start. This soon ended up with me learning how to fight with my fists quite early, protecting my sisters in the school playground. Actually, I ended up having to leave that school because there's too many fighting, and we moved to another place within Manchester. My mother, we then got housing. My father, however, used to travel up and pick us up every other weekend. It's about a 240-mile drive one way and take us back down. Me and my father were very close. My sister was very close to my mother. And 3 years later, my father got custody, of me and my sisters.
Wow, is that hard? I mean, America, it's pretty hard for especially a military dude to get custody.
Yeah.
Over the mom.
Yeah, no, there was. I think obviously, he put his career on pause. He got promoted to regimental sergeant major and was posted to Germany, and he said, no, I want to stay in the UK. I want to look after my kids. And so he put his whole career online, and I think the judge at the time didn't want the siblings splitting up. He didn't want like 2 sisters being in Manchester and the son down south. So the judge said, no, the children make the decision. And being the eldest at the age of about 10 and a half, I had to make that quite hard decision. And so no, I want to live with my father, and he got custody. And even to the day, I remember the day that my mum dropped us off and the reaction she saw when my father took us away. That sticks with you, something like that. But for me, we moved back down to Aldershot, and I'm very close to my father. I never actually wanted to pursue a career in the military myself. I actually always wanted to be a fireman. But we grew up around there. But my dad he was a Scotsman. He was old school sergeant major. He was old school through and through. And I remember finishing like junior school, and we went on to what you call high school, so like secondary school. And
so this is what age? What age is this?
Well, I would have been about 13 at this age.
So at 13, you've been living with your dad for a few years now.
A couple of years.
And you're seeing the military, but you're still not quite. You're not quite. Like enthralled by it.
Yeah. No. As I say, when I was immersed, our school playground was where the Red Devils used to take off, which is the British parachute and free fall teams. So every day you'd see the parachutists. The guys would be walking around in their uniforms and their maroon berets, and it was almost like the norm living in Aldershot. So But my father was now going to transition out of the military. My father, his career wasn't very, he was more sports. He was what we would call a tracksuit soldier. Mm-hmm. He was very good at a sport, and soccer was his. So he was the army manager, coach, and player. So I very rarely saw my father in green kit. It was more tracksuits, trainers, and on the football pitch. So I didn't really know much about the military and the layout of the military. And
was he going on deployments?
He went on deployments to like Northern Ireland, but when he then got custody of the kids, that obviously stopped him going on any deployments. And this was a period of time, actually, the last conflict was 1982, which was the Falklands. Mm-hmm. So there was a dry period up until now. We had the Gulf War in 91, but that was still to come. Actually, that was 2 years later. So other than Northern Ireland, there wasn't really any sort of overseas deployments. So it didn't really affect him going away. But he was now coming to the end of his career and transitioning to Civvy Street. So growing up in Aldershot in these military schools, he then decided to put me in secondary school in the local town. It's called North Camp. But being old school, my father dressed me up day one in a blazer, carrying like a briefcase, a leather briefcase. It wasn't even real leather. That's what I was more upset about. But my hair was a crew cut. Rather than going downtown and paying for a normal haircut, my father would take me to camp and just put me in straight at the front of the queue with all the recruits.
That's legit.
Yeah, so I really stood out. When I turned up at school day one, I stood out.
Wait, so is this school, what kind of, is this school like what we call in America a private school where you have to pay to go to, or what was different?
No, it was a public school, but it wasn't in a military town. It was next to the military town. So the children that went there, their parents weren't from the military. Because it was so close to Aldershot, there was a lot of rivalry between. And so their haircut, I just stood out. And unfortunately, a week later, I got suspended from that school for fighting.
Like, were you just an angry youth or what?
No, I just think I was just put in some really awkward positions, and that being one. But I always remember my father. I know you guys do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. My father, again, always taught me to fight with my fists. And as soon as the guy was
we call
down,
that Scottish Jiu-Jitsu.
Oh, yeah. But as soon as the opponent's down, that's it. You stop. You got the better of them, and there's no like follow up like there is nowadays. So I was so nervous when I got home, and I sort of left the letter on the table and quickly ran upstairs to the toilet. And my father screams out my name, and I come down, and his one question was, Did you hit him when he was down? I said no. He said that's fine. And then I then explained to him. I said, look, you dressed me in this, and he just thought he was doing good by me, when in fact he was bringing far too much attention. We then left actually not long, a few months after that, and moved out into the country, totally away from any sort of military town, and that was almost the start for me. That was the start of a new life. I'd left that military background behind me.
So how old are you now?
I'm probably about 14 now.
Right on. And then you get to where'd you move to when you got this new start?
So I moved to into Surrey. So it's just south of London, but it's more very, very green.
The country.
The country, exactly.
And now did you? How was that? Was that like you said it was a new start because you were able to fit in a little bit better? Your dad didn't shave your head to send you to school?
Yeah, exactly. There was no military barbers, but it was also that no one could judge you. You sort of left your past behind you, Manchester fighting, and, it's almost like this is the baseline. You start from now. So, and again, it was actually nice to socialize with kids whose parents weren't in. It's learning stuff that was out of that military lifestyle. All my friends back in Aldershot, their dads were all airborne, and because my dad wasn't, they called him a hat. You know what I mean? It was just like you didn't have any of that. I didn't have to prove anything to them or feel like because your father's career, you're part of that, and that's what Aldershot was like. It was like, what rank's your father? Is he para? Or is he not? And it's like, oh god.
I had a friend who was Australian SAS, and he was saying, him and his wife, we were talking, and he was like, they have an expression. It was like, oh, their wife wears the rank of the family. So it's like, oh, he's a lieutenant colonel. Who are you? Yeah. It sounds like, but I can't imagine little kids telling me my dad's not airborne.
Oh yeah,
that's pretty great. Why they call him a hat?
It's just saying that the parachute regiment call them hat. I don't know where we used to say heli airborne troop, but it's not. They just call them a hat because they don't have the maroon beret. And then some of the army commandos also take on that terminology and call them hats or screamers.
We in the army, the American army, they call someone that's not airborne a leg. And it's said with such disdain. I remember when I went to airborne school, it was like, "Come here, you nasty leg." And then in the Navy, the aviation guys, people that are in helicopters or jets or whatever planes, they wear brown shoes. It's part of their uniforms. Yeah. So they call, in a derogatory way, they call anybody that's not a brown shoe, which no one's used that term, but they call everyone else a black shoe. And so then in the teams, we take that one step further and like the derogatory, who's that guy? Some shoe came over and told us if we couldn't wear that, whatever. So that's it's funny how you get these little words that stick. Yeah. But hat.
Yeah, hat is the parachute regiment, and then the Marines, obviously from the army, it's Pongo. No. Everywhere the army go, the
you had
Pongos.
Little kids telling you your dad's a hat.
Yeah, and again,
no wonder you had to fight on a regular basis.
Yeah, if it was airborne, I'd probably been all right.
And then so you end up in Surrey.
Yeah,
you're in the country. Do you feel like your life's taken a better direction? So your dad was a great athlete, apparently. Did you inherit that athleticism and love for the game?
I did, yeah. I think that's where I'm very competitive. I like to compete, and I think that's from my father. Even on Christmas Day with the board game, it got that competitive. You had to win, and so I did inherit that from him. Sport wise, I followed in his footsteps. Played football as well. I wasn't great at sport, but I just tried everything. I was very fortunate at school. I ended up getting Sports Personality of the Year award, which sounds amazing.
That does sound pretty amazing.
Yeah, but I wasn't the best at football. I wasn't the best at rugby. I just helped out. If they said, right, we need someone on the basketball team. Well, I don't really know basketball, but I would step in. So I sort of I had that from my father. But and I think that's what helped later on in the military career. I always found myself competing with others or having to prove a point or be an ambassador.
Well, that's two different things, actually. Prove a point or be an ambassador.
Yeah.
I don't know how that's two different things, right? If I'm trying to prove a point, that's one thing. If I'm trying to it's like one's going to come at you. The ambassador is going to be cool. So you found that nice like middle ground between those two things.
Yeah. Well, I found myself that, when you're in the army and you were working alongside Marines, you're an ambassador for your cat badge, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? And then when you go to the SBS from the army, you're an ambassador for the British Army. When you're on Jocko's podcast and you're the first British guy, you're an ambassador for the British Army. So I was proving a point to myself and to them, but almost representing your unit or your cat badge.